There are pains that have no face, wounds invisible to examination, yet they throb in the depths of being. One of these, perhaps the deepest, is the coldness of an adult child, the one you nurtured with such care, who once ran to your arms with a luminous smile, and today, upon meeting, barely looks at you or worse, avoids you. It's a silent pain, hard to name, because it doesn't scream. It simply withdraws into itself. It doesn't hurt in the body, but it weighs on the soul, like a stone at the bottom of a well. It's not the physical absence that wounds, but the emotional abandonment, the feeling of being forgotten by the one who was once the center of your world. Robert Moore, with his deep understanding of the male psyche and the archetypal journey, guides us to realize that the greatest burden for a child is the unintegrated shadow of their parents. And perhaps this phrase, seemingly distant, illuminates something essential. When we give ourselves entirely to our children, nullifying desires, postponing dreams, forgetting ourselves, we unconsciously project onto them the divine king, the expectation that they will be our reason for existence, our ultimate purpose. And as they grow, they carry this weight in silence. They flee. They distance themselves, seeking their own initiation, their own encounter with the self. And perhaps we don't even understand why. Do you remember that little hand you held with such tenderness? The notes saved with affection, the days of fever when you watched over them, the meticulously prepared birthdays, the small gestures invisible to others, but which for you were the expression of love. And today, you receive monosyllabic answers, coldness, disinterest, as if all this had never existed, as if you were just another person in their life, and not the one who gave them life. This indifference is not merely a behavior, it is a symbol, an echo of something deeper, a wound in the archetype of the Great Mother, misunderstood. It's as if the world whispers, "You fulfilled your role, now retire to creative solitude." But is that the truth, or just the reflection of a poorly conducted initiation, of something deeper, not yet integrated in the child and in yourself? The silence of a child can be a punishment, but also a silent request for recognition of their own journey, a reflection of their own process of individuation, as Robert Moore would say, an echo of what was not said or felt, a distancing that did not arise suddenly, but was built up in the details, in the omissions, in the habits never questioned. Perhaps you don't realize it, but what you are experiencing today has ancient roots in the family unconscious, roots that connect with your own ancestors. It begins in the early years, grows with everyday gestures, and matures in silence. And when it explodes in the form of coldness, it is felt as a betrayal, but it is often a consequence of the unspoken, the unlived, the unintegrated in your own journey. Robert Moore invites us to look beyond the surface, to see not only what is done, but what is repeated, what is projected, the archetypal patterns that are at work, what is asked of us, even through tortuous paths. The question that resonates is not only why they left, but also, who am I now if they no longer recognize me? This is the silent betrayal that so many mothers and fathers face. The forgetting of the inner warrior, the forgetting of their own journey, not the forgetting of the facts, but the forgetting of the importance, of the archetypal meaning of the mother-child relationship. And what to do in the face of this? The answer begins with a new listening, a deep listening to your psyche, to yourself. Listening to the silence, the emptiness, what your own soul is trying to tell you after so many years of taking care of everyone but yourself. Because perhaps, before demanding recognition, you need to recover something essential. Your own worth, your inner magician, the one who existed before any child was born. And this is the first step to freeing yourself from pain, not denying what you feel, but understanding, not to beg them to give you something back, but to reunite with your archetypal totality. The silence of the other can be a punishment, but also an invitation for you, finally, to listen to yourself again. If you identify with these reflections, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Robert Moore warns us that much of human suffering arises from archetypal projection. We project onto others what we have not been able to recognize, integrate, or heal within ourselves, in our masculine and feminine energies. In the case of parents, the projection takes a particular form, the expectation of emotional return. You offered love, protection, care. You gave everything and expected, even unconsciously, that one day this would be recognized, that that child, a grown child, would become someone grateful, affectionate, present. Their gestures would be remembered, valued, and reciprocated. But the human soul, as Robert Moore teaches us, doesn't operate according to the principles of emotional justice. There's no exact accounting where each act of love inevitably generates an equivalent gesture of gratitude. The logic of the unconscious is deeper, more complex, governed by archetypes, and often indifferent to rational expectations. The frustration arising from this projection is immense because it's not just disappointment with the other person. It's a wound to your identity, a wound to the archetype of the lover. It's as if the entire narrative you've built throughout your life crumbles. If I gave everything, why do I receive nothing? The answer is painful, perhaps because they don't know how to reciprocate, or because you deposited in them what you needed to find within yourself in the integration of your own archetypes. Robert Moore reminds us, what we don't confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate. This fate might be a child who distances themselves, an emptiness in a relationship, a silence repeated through generations, a dysfunctional family pattern. Many adult children aren't ungrateful out of malice. They are emotionally immature. They were loved, but didn't learn to love. They were protected, but weren't taught to protect. They received without limits, and therefore didn't develop reciprocity. They didn't integrate the energy of the mature lover. The root of ingratitude often isn't coldness, but a lack of awareness, a disconnection from the self. A child who grows up constantly cared for, without realizing the effort involved, naturalizes this care, and as they grow, continues to live as if everything is owed to them. Robert Moore would call this the shadow. Everything excluded from the field of consciousness, all the unintegrated archetypes which continue to influence behavior. The child's shadow is a lack of empathy, the deficiency of the lover. The parent's shadow is the expectation disguised as generosity, the fixation on the energy of the great mother. When we give too much, without limits, without teaching about exchange, without encouraging individuation, we create an imbalance. And this imbalance, sooner or later, exacts its price. Not because the love was in vain, but because it was given without emotional education, without the archetypal initiation that should accompany it. What you feel today, pain, disappointment, anger, isn't solely due to your child's current attitude. It's due to years of giving without realizing that, unknowingly, you were teaching them that your love was automatic, guaranteed, excessively unconditional. Your child didn't learn to be grateful, not because they are insensitive, but because they never needed to think about it. And now as an adult they live by the same childhood rules, where everything revolves around their world, trapped in emotional immaturity. For Robert Moore, the only way to break this cycle is through self-awareness, the integration of archetypes, not by the other person but by your own. The pain you feel should be understood not as punishment, but as a call to clarity, an invitation to leave the position of silent victim and assume your role as an adult who embraces their history with compassion, but also with boundaries, honoring the energy of the warrior. Perhaps your child's coldness is the cruelest mirror life has presented you with. But, like every mirror, it reveals something important, not only who the other person is, but who you have become over time, which archetype predominates in your journey. And that's precisely where the possibility of transformation lies, not by changing the other, but by understanding how archetypal projections shape the relationship and how recovering your dignity, integrating your inner magician, can finally break this invisible cycle of pain and expectations. There's a type of pain that doesn't come from outside, but from within. It doesn't come from aggression, but from absence, silence, coldness. When a child fails to acknowledge who raised them, it's as if something breaks inside you. And the first reaction is usually an internal cry. After everything I did, is this what I get? This cry is the voice of the wounded ego, an ego that isn't selfish in the ordinary sense, but one that has been fed for years with the idea that love generates. The pain you feel now, as Robert Moore reminds us, echoes in the depths of the masculine and feminine, and cries out for initiation. This pain whispers of a wound in the inner king, a sacrifice of the warrior who yearns for recognition, for validation of their worth. Robert Moore invites us to look at this yearning with the honesty of the spiritual warrior. He guides us to understand that everything that wounds us in others, especially those we love deeply like our children, reflects an unintegrated aspect of our own psyche, a shadow of the king that asks to be rescued. When a child's coldness hurts us, we react not just to his behavior but to a part of ourselves, the inner lover, who believed in the archetypal promise of unconditional love, who invested his identity in the role of the provider father, in the act of nurturing and protecting. When that role seems to lose its value, it's as if the very structure of the inner king crumbles, opening an abyss in our soul. It's not just the relationship that fades, but the very archetypal image we built of ourselves. We gave so much with such intensity that we lost connection with the self, with the center of our soul. We forgot the dormant dreams of the magician, the silenced desires of the lover, the boundaries never set by the warrior, all swallowed up by the paternal identity. The trap lies in building the self around a single archetypal function, because when that function transforms, when the son grows and distances himself, what remains is a painful void, a disconnection from the vital energy of our being. Robert Moore shows us that the ego, identifying only with the role of the provider father, distances itself from the totality of the psyche, from the self, and weakens, losing the strength of the warrior. This fragility manifests in the belief that our worth depends on the son's response, that meaning only exists in reciprocation, in the external validation of the king. But this is a dangerous path, which transforms love into dependence, dedication into demand, and absence into despair. It's necessary to remember the man you were before fatherhood, with your unique history, your longings, your fears, your talents, and your inner strength. Fatherhood is an important chapter in the hero's journey, but not the whole story. Robert Moore encourages us toward a movement of archetypal reintegration, a journey back to the self, to the center of our soul. This doesn't imply abandoning love for your son, but rather freeing yourself from the illusion that our worth, the strength of our inner king, depends on him. The true task is not to change the son, but to rediscover who we are without the need for his gaze, without external validation. This journey demands the courage of the warrior because it places us face to face with everything we repressed, with the shadows of the king. But it is in this reunion, in this immersion in one's own psyche, that healing begins to bloom. The paternal ego seeks applause, the validation of the external world, but the self yearns for inner truth. The ego wants reward, but the self seeks archetypal meaning. When we abandon the search for external recognition, we begin to recognize something much deeper: our integrity, our capacity to exist with dignity, the strength of our inner king even in the face of absence, to love without annulling ourselves, to care for ourselves with the same tenderness we dedicate to others. It is this self-care, this compassionate gaze of the lover turned inward, that restores inner peace. You don't need to stop loving your son, but you need to free yourself from the dependence that prevents you from feeling fulfilled, from accessing the strength of your inner king. The identity lost in the role of father can be recovered. Simply look inward with the same compassion you've always offered, and rediscover the man who deserves to be recognized by yourself. Robert Moore reminds us that the soul matures in pain, in confronting the shadows. No profound transformation, no true initiation happens without something within us, especially the energy of the king being confronted and transmuted. Your son's coldness, however painful, may be revealing a truth long ignored: the need to rediscover oneself, to rescue the strength of your inner king. For years your life revolved around him, the care, the worries, the small daily gestures. Now, with the distance, his silence opens space for the essential question: who am I without this role? It's a difficult question, but a liberating one. The pain of distance, the ingratitude, the indifference, all this can be seen not only as symptoms of a wound in the king, but as invitations for a deeper dive into oneself, into the hero's journey. What do you want for yourself, beyond being necessary? What dreams of the magician still whisper in your heart? What value do you as king give yourself when no one sees it? This is the journey back to the self, as Robert Moore describes it. The self does not depend on external approval. It exists as the core of your inner truth, as the archetypal force that resides within you. What prevents us from accessing this core is the attachment to identities that no longer serve us. The self-sacrificing father, the central figure who solves everything, the wounded king. When the son distances himself, this identity disintegrates, and the void that remains, however painful, is also the opportunity to fill it with something new, consciousness. Robert Moore teaches us that suffering, when understood, transforms into light, into inner strength. The repetition of suffering occurs when we seek in our children what we can only find in ourselves: attention, care, validation, meaning. No human being can carry this weight, much less a child. Awakening happens when we accept this reality and stop demanding, begging for affection, and annulling ourselves to please others. It's in this moment that something changes, not in the other person, but within us. We realize our story isn't over, that there's still time for the hero's journey, that our existence has value, the strength of our king, even if it's not recognized. This awakening comes with pain, the grief of an unrealized expectation, but also the liberation from an unfair burden, the belief that our worth depended on someone else. Robert Moore highlights that individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, of integrating archetypes, requires traversing zones of discomfort, re-evaluating beliefs, and above all detaching ourselves from what no longer serves us, from what wounds our inner king. Perhaps you have to abandon the idea that your child will return repentant. Perhaps the hope that he will recognize everything you've done needs to be abandoned, not out of resignation, but out of freedom, out of the strength of the warrior. Because when you stop expecting, you begin to see. When you stop giving explanations, you begin to listen to yourself. And when you abandon the need to be seen, you can finally see yourself, recognize your own worth. This is the true awakening. It doesn't depend on others. It doesn't depend on the past. It depends only on the courage to look at yourself clearly, to accept what you've lived through, and take a new step for yourself, a step on the hero's journey. Pain brought you here, but it's consciousness that will move you forward. And once you awaken, you will never be the same. You feel whole again, with the strength of your inner king restored. As Robert Moore reminds us, we cannot awaken consciousness without pain, without confronting our shadows. Confronting your soul, in this case, means admitting that the bond with your child has changed, that love doesn't guarantee eternal reciprocity. Setting boundaries for fear of losing what little remains of the relationship, remaining silent, allowing disrespect, enduring indifference, all this in the hope of maintaining the connection, of feeding the illusion of a validated king. But the courage of the warrior is needed to break this cycle. Feel this silence that permeates the relationship, this void that whispers of absence. Respect, my dear, doesn't bloom in the absence of conflict, but rather in the clarity of the soul, in the integration of the feminine and masculine within us, in the balance of the archetypes. It is born when love refuses to be imprisoned by servitude, when care is freed from the shackles of servility, when affection remains firm, yet protected by boundaries that honor the dignity of the one who loves, the strength of their inner king. Saying no is not rejection. It's a sacred affirmation of your own existence. It's whispering to the world, I exist too. I will not accept being treated with contempt. My life is precious, a sacred garden. I am not here to be ignored. These are not words of confrontation, but declarations of a being awakening to their own essence, to the strength of their inner king. Robert Moore guides us on this path of individuation, of becoming who we truly are, of integrating our archetypes, and this necessarily implies establishing healthy boundaries between the self and the other, honoring the sacred dance between these two poles. In the case of parents and children, this means recovering psychic separation, a return to one's own individuality, a process that is often lost over years of dedication, sacrifice, and emotional fusion. For a long time you were available, always present, a beacon in the storm of the soul. Perhaps you offered help even when your own reserves of masculine energy were depleted. Perhaps you said yes to silence internal and external conflicts, seeking the harmony of the king at any cost. Perhaps you remained distant for fear of appearing ungrateful, cold, indifferent, trapped in the inertia of the magician. But without realizing it, these attitudes whispered to your child that your love is unconditional to the point of tolerating disrespect, of nurturing the shadow of the pure that dwells within him, neglecting the strength of the warrior. True love, as Robert Moore shows us, does not exclude boundaries. On the contrary, it strengthens itself in the sacred space of the lover, where each one can be whole, complete in themselves, a reflection of the totality of the self. The absence of boundaries generates confusion, resentment, and often contempt, a dense fog that obscures the light of love, imprisoning us in the tyranny of the magical child. When you set boundaries, you are saying with the firmness of the king, I care about you, but I also care about myself. I am here, present in body and soul, connected to my inner warrior, but not at the cost of my worth, my sovereignty. I can love you deeply, with the compassion of the lover, but I will not annul myself to fragment, to lose myself in the process, succumbing to the dependency of the puer. These gestures, inspired by the wisdom of the elder, not only restructure the relationship, but redefine it, revealing the sacred dance that must be mutual, respectful, conscious, and above all adult, integrated with mature archetypes. Many parents fear that setting boundaries is a risk, a threat to connection, an abandonment of the magic child. But, as Robert Moore reminds us, what truly breaks the bond is constant permissiveness, repeated disrespect, the absence of one's own warrior voice, the accumulation of small wounds that, over time, transform into invisible walls between two souls who were once so close. Robert Moore shows us that the path to transformation lies in an act of warrior courage, to look within and recognize that one's dignity, one's intrinsic worth, cannot depend on another. When you act from this king principle, you begin a process of repositioning yourself in the world, and this includes the universe of family relationships. Setting boundaries is not an act of harshness, but an act of deep self-love from the lover, an embrace of your wounded inner child, an integration of the divine child. It's a psychic landmark that reorganizes the role you play in the lives of others, and more importantly, in your own life. It's not about imposing fear with the tyrant, but about inspiring respect with the firmness of the king. And respect isn't begged. It's built with a firm, authentic presence, rooted in your own being, in the totality of the self, a presence that declares, with the wisdom of the elder, I am here, whole, but not under any condition. I can support you with the generosity of the lover, but you will no longer devalue me. I am your father, I am your mother, but I am also a person, an individual with a history, with dreams, with a soul that yearns to be seen and recognized. This repositioning, guided by the elder, alters the dynamics of the relationship, the dance between two beings. The child may feel strange at first, may resist the change, but over time they will learn that the love that sets boundaries, that honors the individuality of each, guided by the king and the warrior, is the only love capable of enduring without corroding self-esteem, without creating dependence on the poor. This is the reconstruction of respect, a process of inner strengthening of the warrior, of reconnecting with one's own voice, a reaffirmation of one's inherent worth, and above all, a gesture of emotional maturity from the elder that invites the other to grow, not through the force of the tyrant, but through the example of the king, through the inspiration of the lover. Because when someone respects themselves with the firmness of the king, they teach without words that they deserve to be respected. There is a profound difference, according to Robert Moore, between love as a spontaneous expression of the lover's soul and love as an instrument of the tyrant's control, of manipulation. When we love expecting reciprocity, we are unconsciously signing an invisible contract, a tacit agreement that demands a return. But this kind of love, as Robert Moore warns us, is not authentic. It is imbued with projections, with unresolved desires of the abandoned child, and above all, with emotional dependence on the pure. Psychological maturity, according to Robert Moore, implies renouncing the internal bonds that keep us tied to others. This includes the expectation of being recognized, valued, or loved in the way we would like. To love without expecting anything in return is one of the highest expressions of the lover's emotional consciousness, an act of pure generosity of the soul. You gave your all. You cared, protected, educated. You were present when no one else was, and although they may not see it today, may not recognize the depth of your love, this does not change the truth of what you did, of what you offered. What was given sincerely with true love remains. The value of your gift is not erased because the other person doesn't recognize it. It remains because it came from a true place within you, from your essence, from yourself. But the pain arises when the heart yearns for something in return, a gesture, a word, a look, and the silence transforms into an open wound of the abandoned child, into a silent cry of the soul. That's when the need for liberation arises. Liberation from expectation, not from love. To free oneself from expectations means understanding that your inner peace, your serenity, cannot depend on the behavior of another person, that your happiness is not in the hands of your son, daughter, grandchild, or any other human being. It resides, as Robert Moore teaches us, in the way you relate to your own existence, to your inner journey, to the integration of your archetypes. Robert Moore instructs us that the integration of the self, the process of becoming whole, requires emotional autonomy. This doesn't mean cutting ties, but recognizing the limits of what another person can offer. Your child can't always give you what you need. People aren't always mature enough to understand the depth of what they've received, but that's no longer your responsibility. When you stop expecting, something truly powerful happens. You are liberated. You stop measuring your actions by the return you receive. You stop living in the tension of frustration, in the anxious wait for external validation. You stop conditioning your self-worth on the reactions of others. And, little by little, you begin to realize that what you seek in others, you can and should cultivate within yourself. This isn't selfishness, it's maturity. It's the beginning of a new way of living, no longer guided by expectations, but by the conscious choice to offer what you have most precious, emanating the energy of the lover, without losing yourself in the process. The pain of ingratitude in this new perspective transforms into learning, into growth. You realize you did what you could with the resources you had, that you gave your best, not to be recognized, but because it made sense to you, to your soul. And that meaning doesn't need anyone's validation. By freeing yourself from expectations, you also free the other person from the obligation to meet your projections. And, ironically, it is in this space of freedom that many relationships begin to transform. When there are no more demands, space emerges for spontaneity, for the rebirth of connection. It may be that your son or daughter begins to see you with more presence, not because they feel obligated, but because they feel free to return, to draw closer. But even if that doesn't happen, you remain at peace because you have connected with an essential truth. The value of your life does not reside in the gratitude of others, but in the depth with which you live it, in the intensity with which you dance your own dance, in the integration of your archetypes. By offering love as a gift, without emotional attachments, without invisible clauses, you achieve a rare form of freedom, a deep sense of inner peace. It is love that respects, welcomes, and understands, including the limits of the other person. This is the wisdom of the elder. It is what Robert Moore would call a return to the center, to your own axis, the point where you stop spinning around the absences of others and begin to orbit around your own consciousness, yourself. You don't need to stop loving, but you do need to stop depending on external love to feel complete. Love, when it is true, is a light that ignites within you and continues to shine even if no one notices it. And this light, when it emanates from within, not only illuminates you but also everything around you. Your child may not thank you, your daughter may not understand, but that doesn't erase who you are, a complete and integrated being on your journey of individuation. You are, in your essence, a warrior. You don't love to be recognized. Loving is an act of power, inherent to your psyche, to your being. And that, only that, is enough. You are not just a father. You are not just a mother. Behind this socially constructed role, there is a complete individual, forged in archetypes, primal desires, deep emotions, and stories that echo from the beginnings of your soul, long before anyone imposed the title of father or mother upon you. Over time, it is common for the parental role to dominate and obscure personal identity, the shadow of the caregiver engulfing the inner warrior. You begin to define yourself only by the reflection you see in the eyes of another. But there comes a crucial moment in the hero's journey where you need to remember something fundamental. You were not born to live solely for others. The absence of a child hurts. The coldness penetrates like a sword into the warrior's heart. Indifference, forgetfulness, how it resonates deeply in the cave of the soul. But this pain, however devastating it may seem, however much it threatens to fragment your being, does not define the essence of your warrior spirit. Robert Moore teaches us, what we deny possesses us. What we accept transforms us. Resisting pain only prolongs the winter of the soul. The more we try to repress the wild dance of emotions, the more they take root in the unconscious, corroding the vital force of the warrior. But when we begin to embrace these energies, not with the passivity of the defeated, but with the vigilant consciousness of the spiritual warrior, we begin the process of individuation, the alchemy of transformation. Accept that you may never see the totality of the fruits of your battle. Accept that you may never fully recognize the depth of your sacrifice on the battlefield of life. Accept that the longed-for recognition, the king's acclaim, may never come. But also, accept that this absence does not invalidate the sacred tapestry of your heroic story. You lived with the courage of the warrior, you offered the vital blood of your soul, you were present with the indomitable force of compassion, and nothing can erase the silent greatness, the nobility, inherent in this act of warrior love. A time comes on the hero's journey when maturity calls us to a new kind of pilgrimage, the journey back to the inner castle, the reconnection with the totality of our warrior being. To become whole again, to integrate the shadow and the persona, even without the fanfare of trumpets, even without the gleam of a medal on our chest, even if the other never perceives the depth of your presence, of your inner strength. This is the deepest task of the mature soul, of the warrior who has found their inner sword, to detach from the bonds of what will not return and turn to the eternal flame that still burns on the altar of your heart. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to justify the paths chosen on the map of your journey, nor insist on receiving the tribute that cannot be offered. Now is the time to dance with the lightness of the warrior who has won their inner battles, the lightness of someone who has done what they could, and now allows themselves to flourish in their own heroic essence. Life doesn't end when a child distances themselves. It simply invites you to a new act in your personal saga, where you are the protagonist of your own epic story, where the days no longer revolve around the anxious wait for the prodigal son's return, but around the full presence of the warrior who has found themselves, where moments are not defined by someone's absence, but by your own sacred company, by the strength of your warrior spirit. Robert Moore guides us to understand that true peace blossoms from the integration of the archetypes within us. When we stop seeking answers in the mirror of others and begin to fully inhabit the inner sanctuary, the castle of our soul, we discover that we are not alone on this journey. There are thousands of warriors, parents, traversing the same path of self-discovery, of individuation, and all of them, like you, are uncovering that the pain of absence can be transmuted into the wisdom of inner presence, into the quiet strength of the spiritual warrior. So now, breathe deeply like a warrior before battle. Acknowledge your story, your scars, your victories. Honor the path traveled and declare aloud with the firmness of your sword, with the tenderness of your warrior heart, with the authenticity of someone who has finally found themselves again. I am valuable, even without recognition, even in the silence of the battlefield, because I have found myself again. And when a warrior finds themselves again, the inner landscape transforms, not because the other has returned, but because you have returned to yourself, to your center, to your inner strength. And it is in this embrace of self-acceptance, in this act of personal power, that the true peace of the warrior resides. If this reflection resonated with your warrior soul, like the video, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to receive more stories and reflections like this. That way you won't miss any new content. May you be well, and until the next battle.